All right, welcome to episode 8 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm Isaiah Bollinger, your co-host, CEO of Trellis, and I'm here with Tim. Tim, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Timothy Peterson. I'm a client advocate for Trellis. Also, I have a long career in B2B and B2C e-commerce. Let me mention our sponsor. Our sponsor is Punchout2Go. They're a global B2B integration company. They specialize in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. And Punchout2Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. Punchout catalogs electronic purchase orders, e-invoices, other B2B sales, order automation documents in order to accelerate business results. So thank you to our sponsor. And then right back to you, Isaiah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm super excited to introduce our guest, Mark, from, you guys are now Digital Commerce 360. I'm still used to internet retailer, so it's hard for me to say that without thinking about the old name. So.
It's our new rebranding, so we thought we're going to be super duper and with it. We hopefully we are, so yeah.
Well, I like it. It's 360, B2B and B2C. It's all one, everything's just one thing. And Mark, you obviously have a ton of experience in e-commerce and retail and just commerce. So, love to hear more about kind of your experience and how you got into this.
Well, we're, as you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning us, we're Digital Commerce 360 B2B. And as far as I know, we're the only journalistic research and news organization that covers B2B commerce day in, day out from a research and analysis and strategic perspective. And we try and cover the waterfront, the technology, the business strategy, the best practices, all the things that moves an entire market forward. We try and cover that. But at the end of the day, we're just working reporters that try and go out and find out what the trends are and go and talk to people and then do two things: put it into perspective, but more importantly, tell our audience of these B2B professionals from a lot of walks of life, what does it mean to them? And so giving data to somebody is not just enough. You have to kind of tell them what it means to me and how is that going to benefit me or not benefit me. And then it's kind of up to them to, filter the information and kind of go on through. But what we found is that we're journalists, so, we're not technology companies, we're not consultants. We have no axe to grind. We're just here to try and cover the market and measure the growth and kind of find out what's new, because we're a bunch of inquisitive old line reporters at the end of the day. But covering B2B commerce is just fascinating from all the perspectives I just mentioned. So it's just a lot of fun. So the days go by pretty quick.
Yeah. And it feels like the market's changing so fast. It's gone by. I remember in 2000, when I started in 2012, 2013, I was pretty young and optimistic. And I remember actually telling distributors, prospective distributors, hey, I know I can get you to $1 million online. And they thought I was crazy. Like, they literally thought I was crazy because they were doing like zero online, these companies. And now, like, looking back, like $1 million online is nothing. Like for B2B, it's a drop in the bucket, right? Yeah.
Here's some perspective, because literally about 2 weeks ago, I finished our 2020, our B2B e-commerce 2020 market report. What we do is we measure what was the growth across all the electronic channels for B2B for 2019. So it's good perspective. But so what? Been there, done that. Who cares? COVID-19 is changing the world. So we took a look at trying to kind of forecast with some actual numbers here where we think B2B is going in 2020. So here's some takeaways. Last year, B2B commerce, just the sites, and we define, I'm very clear on how we define those, because there's a lot of different buckets in B2B commerce. It's actually digital commerce and electronic sales. So all in, if you include EDI, if you include e-procurement, if you include the private networks, if you include the marketplaces, login portals, and pure B2B commerce sites, it is a $9 trillion market. $9 trillion that grew last year by approximately 9%. Now, if you look at the growth spot, what's growing faster than anything else across all these wide B2B channels, which is EDI, e-procurement, marketplaces, logins, if you will, behind the scenes firewalls, it is the pure e-commerce part of this. The B2B commerce sites, the marketplaces, and even though it is behind a firewall, it's still a direct transaction that takes place via the web. So I count that as e-commerce. That grew by 18% last year to 1.3 trillion.
Wow.
And guess what? B2C grew by 16%. So the first time ever, B2B commerce grew faster than B2C e-commerce. That's a big takeaway.
Yeah.
The other takeaway, though, is so it was a big growth year, 2019. People love to see the meter go up, if you will. But in January, along comes this pandemic. Oh, it'll be done in 2 weeks. We're back to normal. Well, no such thing. So as we all know, COVID and coronavirus upended the world as we know it, shuttered our $21 trillion economy. And what happened is that caught a lot of companies unawares, because now procurement directors, purchasing managers, business owners, they're all working from home. And all of this is now suddenly shifting from, even more so, from fax and mail and call and blah, blah, to e-commerce. So next thing you know, B2B commerce is seeing this tidal wave, literally a tidal wave of demand for buying first, the PPE stuff and the sanitation stuff, and they ran out of that. And then what's happened since then is a lot of companies had to do crisis management. How do we cope with this? What do we do? Our world's going extreme here. So there was heads down. E-commerce played a big part of that. How do we transition commerce? Because that seems to be growing. Everything else is falling apart. What's happening here? So now the marketplace is past, the crisis management stuff. These guys are into Q4 planning already. They're looking to kind of manage the cost, get the ROI right. But for the first time, they're trying to kind of see which way is all this heading as we come out of, the actual crisis management of these like tiered 5 openings that were. So what's all that going to mean? It's going to be a whipsaw effect. E-commerce this year will grow by an estimated 10% to about maybe 1.39 trillion. That's my early forecast. So yeah, it's up, but compared to 18% last year, why is that? Well, because manufacturing and distribution sales in 2020 are going to decrease by 1.52% because you've got entire productions, facilities, industries still offline. So there's going to be a plunge in sales and activity, and that's reflected in the U.S. Department of Commerce monthly numbers on manufacturing, and you see that in the manufacturers' procurement indexes, all these types of things. So the thing is, it's going to grow, and it's going to be less activity, but it's going to be still a pretty big year when you consider that's still a $1.39 trillion market. And to kind of put the most perspective on this is, for the first time ever in 2019, if you take that 9 trillion bucket of all the electronic sales, which is EDI, e-procurement, marketplaces, the site stuff, the login stuff, all those buckets, that's what makes up digital commerce or electronic sales, my takeaway is this: 51.4% of all that $15 trillion market that makes up all distributors and manufacturer sales is electronic. So what's the takeaway? The first takeaway is this: 51% is still electronic, but guess what? That remaining 48% is still a multi-trillion-dollar market. Those who go and feast on that multi-trillion-dollar market will be the beneficiaries of the kind of growth that's going to blow B2C out of the water, because it's just such a bigger, more fragmented market. So more growth ahead. Yeah. there is a sea change underway because of the pandemic, but it's whipsaw. Luxury goods, they're already forecasting online losses for Q4, even though it's only the mid-June point. But, the PPE people, the health safety people, healthcare, for the first time, if you've ever worked in the healthcare space, and I've toiled in that vineyard too, healthcare supply and supply chains are very closed, very cloistered, very regulated market because you're dealing with health networks and hospitals. They have their way of doing things. Healthcare is unto itself. Along comes COVID-19. For the first time ever, companies that had never in their life heard of a marketplace or B2B commerce, suddenly are kind of looking outside their cloistered, time-honored healthcare supply chain. I can't get everything from McKesson like I used to. I can't get it all from Cardinal Health like I used to. These are my big guys. I have to have ventilators, masks, gowns, bedpans, you name it. So for the first time, they began going out to places like Alibaba, Amazon Business, eBay Business, all these healthcare verticals. And suddenly, you know what? Marketplaces are mushrooming even more so than last year and becoming a chief driver for the first time of e-commerce sales, because that's one impact that COVID-19 had on e-commerce, which is to drive much more varied interest from all these new parties onto marketplaces of all sorts. So,
I want to interject and pick up on one thing you just said, Mark, that I really have found myself and some of the folks I've been talking to, and there's also an effect during COVID of B2B going B2C, which I had not really even thought about very much before, because a lot of these, healthcare or health and wellness or what have you related businesses all of a sudden had this huge demand from average people or small, let's say, medical offices even, and really it became a B2C or hybrid B2B kind of operation, and having to have these discussions about, like, all right, the marketplace, as you just said, or looking at commerce in ways that they never had to look before. I mean, when do you remember before COVID just being able to go on Amazon and get masks and gloves and whatever in such quantity and variety? It just wasn't really even possible, right? So things have changed dramatically.
Well, I got to tell you, this is you go out and you talk to these people, and we try and do that. I mean, that's kind of how Paul and I spend our day, which is kind of going out and just knocking on doors, and you tell us your stories. But I got to tell you,
just want to make sure
Paul Demery.
We plug Paul there.
Paul is, Paul Demery is he's like a force of nature in B2B commerce. I've worked with Paul. He's been my colleague and friend for 25 years. Paul was the first person from a journalist perspective to really get what B2B commerce is, what it is, kind of soup to nuts. And it's kind of a unique talent to have, because this stuff can be somewhat, I mean, it all gets clogged up, and you got to unpack it and understand each point. Paul has been so good at doing that. So that's why we're lucky to have Paul to this day. But anyway, some of these guys, like you just mentioned, they have some great war stories. I'll give you a case in point. There's a small merchant, about 25 million total sales, totally B2B, sustainable supply, and he sells kind of green label, if you will, products to businesses of all sorts. Another one is a really interesting guy I've known, good friend of mine, Vic Hanna. He runs a company called BettyMills.com. Both of these, for the most part, are in a chunk of their business is and they're all mostly B2B, but Vic is completely healthcare. Brian over at Sustainable Supply is a chunk of that. When COVID-19 hit, they got cleaned out of the Purell stuff. Cleaning stuff overnight. And so, they put in a call to Clorox, hey, when's our next delivery? They said, well, maybe like late July. So what happened is, to kind of get to the point here, is like, I asked Vic one day for a story. I said, how would you describe the current marketplace? This is like in March, right when things are kind of hitting the fan, so to speak. He goes, it is a war out there. So to your point, the B2C stuff, there is an example after example after example of these companies where for the first time, they have to put in the personalization stuff. Okay, I'm out of X. Well, do you know what a product recommendation tool is? I sure don't. What does that do? It suggests other products to people that because you're out of this stuff. And so you're right. A lot of B2C, because we're all kind of working from home for our job now, was hitting a lot of these companies flat in the jaw. So the thing is, fine, you're running an advanced platform, maybe you don't have it but you're running an advanced platform, you know something about this stuff, that becomes an easier add-on than not. But if you're still running some kind of homegrown legacy-based e-commerce platform and suddenly, you're out of X and people want X, I can't get X, I won't have X for several more months, I can't tell them what Y is, that is been a big problem that a lot of companies to this day are still scurrying to try and
Sorry, I just want to touch on this point because you're getting into the platforms a little bit, and this is, I think, what's interesting about B2B e-commerce is the technology. Like you said, it's more fragmented in the market. It's more fragmented in technologies. So I'm curious if you're seeing what technologies you are seeing kind of becoming more successful than others. Obviously, Trellis, we're a little bit biased, and we do a lot of Magento, but we still see. We're actually seeing some Shopify in B2B a little bit, which is interesting. And then, we also do BigCommerce and a couple others. But I'm curious to see what platforms you see are kind of helping drive these companies forward most successfully. Insight seems to be another one that we see popping up more and more in the B2B space.
Insight has a pretty good platform for kind of that mid-tier kind of company. But it's more, I would answer that question more along the lines of the tool set that we're seeing. A lot of these tools and features, they're kind of ubiquitous for all the platforms, if you will. But so it's kind of more from the tool feature perspective. So, the personalization is the first component, and the product recommendation is a big thing there. But the next thing, if you will, is if you kind of look at, what the platform does, for the first time, a lot of these companies are shifting. I mean, they got caught unawares. Okay, we ship mega truckloads and mega pallets of A to B. And our world for distribution is A to B to A to Z. Well, guess what? Suddenly, we have all these small guys wanting all this stuff. We haven't got a frickin' clue how to do that. What do we do? So one aspect is now you're seeing a lot more of, how sophisticated order tracking is in the B2C world, order fulfilled, order tracking, pick your data delivery, blah, blah. We're so used to that on the B2C side. That is, for a lot of these companies, the new world yet to conquer in B2B. So to answer your question, a product recommendation engine is one tool we're seeing that's getting a lot of what is it, how do I use it, how do I fit it in. But if you take it one step further, the order management part of all this, there is a huge new world that is being exposed to these B2B guys where they got to figure out order shipping, order tracking, all of this. And so they're not used to that. And we're seeing a lot more interest in putting in place those kinds of tools for either a new platform or adding to the platform they currently have. So there's a lot of it.
And you think that their ERPs aren't capable of this, so how, that's where I think that the breakdown happens is because, you could look at it like this. You have your core e-commerce platform. A lot of times you could have a separate recommendations engine add on to the platform, right? Which actually might be the better way to go because some of these platforms just specialize in recommendations. They might be better at it than the core platform. But then you have to bring into the order management and also the ERP. So that's where I think the breakdown happens a lot of times is you have all these disparate systems with different data, getting it all synced together. So you see that their ERPs aren't sufficient. So they need to also look at an order management on top of their ERP or improve their ERP to do better order management.
Well, if you kind of take it one step further, you're onto something, which is probably the single biggest issue that these B2B guys, and I'm talking generalities here, and I'm kind of lumping everybody into kind of one bucket, but because there's so many verticals and industries where e-commerce differs from market to market, I mean, petrochemicals is not the same as MRO, nor will it ever be. So, yeah, is it still called commerce? You bet. How you deliver and do commerce is different from, especially chemicals as it is for MRO. But
Yeah.
to your point, the biggest single challenge I think that a lot of these guys that are still holding them back is, you mentioned the ERP to an order management system. Well, guess what? You can talk to some of these even small to mid-sized companies that go back a lot of years, and they don't just have one ERP; they have 4 to 5, and that has been kind of driving their back end for so many years, that they know that they're comfortable with it. They can manage the cost to it. Inefficient, they know, but it kind of gets them to the end of the day. So there is a big back end data mess that only now are these companies beginning to clean up. So things like AI, artificial intelligence, blockchain and IoT. A lot of that kind of gets hyped, if you will, in the brave new world of digital commerce and digital transformation. But the fact of the matter is, there's going to be a big, huge market for just those 3 tools alone, because those are the tools that begin to kind of clean up all these disparate, old legacy ERP supply chain issues that suddenly now begin to kind of unify across divisions and company lines and all of that, even global divisions, for finally getting the back end in order to really begin to kind of do the data that feeds into a universal and fast e-commerce experience. So the back end for a lot of these guys is a mess, and until they kind of get that right, e-commerce is literally a pipe dream for them. They're not going to pull it off, at least not with any kind of great success.
So you think that a big part of the failure is they're trying to do e-commerce, but really they're actually focused on the wrong thing, because maybe they're on like a really legacy ERP and they're not going to be able to integrate to the e-commerce well enough, or they're trying to like leap forward and not fix one of their core problems before they actually get to e-commerce.
They don't get the entire food chain. Company after company after company that Paul and I talk to every single day. Yes, we're doing e-commerce. Well, what are you doing? Well, we put in this wonderful new platform from X, and we're doing Y. And what % of your product catalog is on that? Well, we do our new products there, or we do our low-end products there, or we sell our liquidated merchandise there, because we're trying to understand this whole thing called e-commerce. Well, guess what? That's like understanding how the foot works and not the entire human body. And what they're focusing on is they're kind of losing the micro to not quite see the macro. And that's where a lot of companies come into trouble, because they'll put the front end in and they'll kind of go about putting together, for the first time, how to sell, one of their low-end products online, or their new product arrivals, or so on and so forth. But at the meantime, if you kind of go back all the way across the food chain, they still have yet to understand the whole process and what could be lurking out there, which is a problem for a lot of these companies, the whole data mess issue I just mentioned. So they're trying to understand the footprint of the e-commerce site, but what they really need to kind of do is to kind of look at the entire process. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, kind of a full team at the company to kind of do that. But until you do, these companies are going to be successful in e-commerce this way versus that way.
So
it's fun.
It's incredibly fun. And one of the things also related to this, that I was talking to some folks about this recently, and it's so hilarious, because average consumers never think about a lot of it, but it's like, how do you move soil? Companies that move dirt, right? Companies that move gravel, companies that move mulch, how logging and lumber works. And, it's fascinating in a way. Like, each one of these things is a complete education every time I talk to somebody in one of these areas, but they all bring up all sorts of new things. So you're right. I mean, sometimes they're having these conversations about, like, a digital upgrade, or some sort of a transformation, or putting a site where something can be ordered. But it just is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, one of the things that came up I had not really thought much about was how much governments have to be involved in some of these different areas that people work in B2B. When you're moving soil over certain state lines or certain quantities, it becomes a Department of Environmental Conservation thing. It's an Army Corps of Engineers thing. It's permits that have to happen all along the way for transport. It's astounding, right? And so a lot of this is not like I'm ordering soil from New York to Massachusetts. It's that how many different entities along the way have to give some sort of approval, and how many of those can be digitized in any real way or not, right? So it's astoundingly complicated. So you can't just put a face and say, "Here's the shop,"
Yeah.
Here's a war story for you. This is also a guest I would suggest that you have on your podcast, and I'm happy to give you her contact information. But there is a person named Lisa Butters, and Lisa Butters is one of the kindest, nicest, gracious, savvy e-commerce minds in all of B2B. Harvard MBA, but she works for Honeywell Aerospace.
Mm-hmm.
And she launched a marketplace called Go Trade Direct. It's about 2.5, 3 years old. And, she is just, if she's not running something major inside 5 years, I mean, a huge e-commerce organization, I'd be very surprised. I kind of look for me, I've kind of a nose for talent, and you kind of spot people. And, way back when B2C was going, we started talking with e-commerce leaders back when they were just kind of getting their junior e-commerce position. And then the next thing you know, they're the EVPs and CEOs. And so watching who's coming out in the B2B world to kind of lead the same way, Lisa Butters is one of these people, because not only does she get it, she gets it. And she loves jousting at windmills like Don Quixote. Here's a case in point. Go Trade Direct, part of Honeywell Aerospace. Aerospace replacement parts is a $14 billion industry, and none of it's e-commerce. So Lisa decided that Honeywell is going to take the lead on this, and they put together, she looked at Etsy, and she looked at CarMax, and she put together, that became the cornerstones for this marketplace that she built. And she is just very smart about using technology from the B2C side to apply it to this marketplace, where even though it's Honeywell, it's an open marketplace, and they've got, I get the stats every quarter from her, but they've got some good volume going. But here's a case in point. Via technology, e-commerce technology and blockchain, it used to be that when, like let's say a Learjet gets retired, it comes off the line, and then companies that like Honeywell will do this, they'll spend an entire length of time harvesting the entire plane, and then they'll refurbish and resell the parts to the rest of the world, replacement parts. That used to be a 6-month process from taking it off the plane, archiving it, rehabbing it, cataloging it again, put it in the system, get it here, get it there, 6-month process. Guess what? She came up with a blockchain application that made that happen from 6 months to 2 days.
Wow.
They could take it off. They could take it off. And because of blockchain, they could do all of the technology in between, and in just inside the course of 2 or 3 days, the full certification, the full history, all that stuff that has to go with selling a refurbished plane part, if you will. She did that. Or she built this platform where, for the first time, $100,000 jet engine was sold to a guy with a Gmail account.
Wow.
And so the thing is, slowly but surely, she says that we're going to teach this old line aviation aerospace market how to do e-commerce, and who's to say she's wrong? And there's other examples like that in the world as well. I would also encourage you to look at a company called Shea Mondis, CHEMONDIS. Who are they? They are a specialty chemicals marketplace that is just as innovative as Lisa Butters, and they're German-based, and they're kind of rolling out in the EU first, but they're coming to North America now. And we were talking about data being tied to the commerce platform.
Yeah.
They are a great example for the first time, bringing that supply chain transparency to the marketplace and the commerce. And for the first time, the specialty chemical buyers can see parts of the transaction and measure it and grow from there that have never been put together before. It's a fascinating story. And you should have those two people as your guests, and they're really great people at both instances, because they will give you some actual in the trench how B2B is changing their stagio market. They're just great stories to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for you to put us in touch with them, and we'll try and get them on. So I have a couple more questions regarding, we talked a little bit about the challenges and the data part. So I think data is a big part of the failures. I think it's product data and the ERP data, and getting that, like, kind of synchronizing their data from like fulfillment and inventory, so that when you're buying, how, like, there's that unified experience buying. Pricing is also a big one. So pricing would kind of go into the data side. But let's say you solve all the data stuff, and that's some of the stuff that we're doing with Trellis. I still think there's another point of failure that we're seeing. And that point where I see is kind of like strategy and culture and building the process into the sales team. So what I find is that a lot of these organizations, they get up and running, and then they treat the site like it's we have a customer like this that I've been trying to convince them to do more with B2B. They almost treat it like a B2C site, where, like, it works, but if you ask them to start bringing on big customers, and we can create a corporate account for them, and their big customers can, call it, say Honeywell is their customer, then each division of Honeywell can get their own login that rolls up to the corporate login. And then now all of a sudden Honeywell is buying online. They get very scared because they're like, oh, then my salespeople are going to be obsolete. So I think there's this, like, cultural challenge too, where, like, the salespeople have to be on board, and you have to kind of figure out how to commission the salespeople and rethink sales, so that sales is basically like selling new business or account managing and saying, hey, you bought $1 million on the site, but I noticed you didn't buy this. This is what here's some things that you could also buy, and upselling them instead of just taking orders over the phone. Do you see where I'm coming from there? And how,
it's funny, because don't you love how a lot of companies just love to shoot themselves in the foot. And so you touched on one of the hot points, which is the sales force. Okay, let's talk about that for a sec. Okay, fine. In a lot of industries, of course, the sales rep, well, that's my client. I know my client. Nobody can service my client like me, because they know me, and because that has been the tried and true pipeline, for 100 odd years, 50 years, 25 years, 50, I don't know, whatever the time is. That is how they make their money. So a lot of these old companies are so afraid of trying to change up what works. And, they'll hire, I hear the story quite a bit. You bring in somebody who is, who knows what e-commerce is, know how it operates, knows what to do, knows how to do it. And guess what? They come into, and they're a stranger in a strange land, because they get it. And nobody else around them who's their counterpart or who's their boss wants to do it, because they're just fine with the way things are. So they've been hired to put together this wonderful e-commerce platform, and the CEO has growth plans in mind for it, and a budget, and they can't get off the dime because nobody else in the company buys into them. And that's driven home with the sales force, because a lot of these people are worried about losing revenue if they shift away from what kind of brings the money in now. Or, the employees themselves are reticent to do it because it's job security, commissions, the whole 9 yards. So here's two examples. Here's another guest for you. Go and invite Marta Dalton, Dalton, from Unilever. The best company who ever did anything was solving that whole challenge with the sales force is Coca-Cola. Marta was the director of e-commerce. And what did she do? They became a digital-first sales organization because she went and she tackled every single issue point by point by point. What do? You don't cut commissions with the sales team. You give them more commission, or you give them credit for this sale to them. So they took the paycheck issue off the table, and guess what? 0.1 buy-in. Number two, what they did was they went through this entire process where they looked at everything, the cost of customer acquisition, how much time it was taking a rep to go out, go to 10 different distributors every single day, take the same order, come back in, key it into the automated system, or call it in and have somebody else kind of key it in, so on and so forth. That came out to like maybe an average like $50 an order, if you will. That was the overhead for the sales force. So Marta went to work, and she found that if they could digitize the process, two things. They could drive that $50 down to like 2 or 3, and they can empower the contact center to offload and take away all the administrative stuff that the sales team was doing. And once they did that, the upside to the sales team was, okay, now, would you rather spend your day doing paperwork and fax orders and data entry, or would you rather spend it calling on customers that you know better than anybody else and getting to do more business with code, because now you're freed up from this administrative stuff. So the thing is,
that's what I say. The whole point of B2B e-commerce is that so sales reps can actually sell instead of taking orders or talking to people about things that they could easily just go in and key in themselves.
Oh yeah, and companies that I've talked to, they call it different things, but exactly what you said, Mark. It's like they incentivize their sales teams by calling them like digitization bonuses or innovation bonuses to switch over, to new ways of doing things, and then they all ended up being very happy, because it wasn't that fault. Right.
So we've done multiple stories over the years about the whole issue of Salesforce buy-in, and it comes down to what's the first thing you attack when you're trying to convince the sales force that this e-commerce thing is going to be a benefit and not a drawback to them, which is take the compensation table off the table, I should say, make it a non-issue, and guess what? Half your battle is won right single there, and there's more companies beginning to address that, but the ones that do that first, they're the ones that tell us they were able to kind of get company-wide buy-in faster after that, because first it was the CEO gets it, but now the Salesforce guys, not the vendor, but the sales team, if you will, and the VP, director in charge of sales, now they're happy with it because they took the compensation first thing, dealt with it, made people happy. Now we can move on to the rest of kind of figuring out the process here. Huge roadblock. If you fix it right away, makes your life in B2B commerce much, much easier.
And how I think actually that someone, whether it's the VP of sales or maybe it's the CEO, whoever's kind of got some buy-in from the sales team should be involved in the projects. And actually, I'm thinking about a prospect that we have right now where I'm concerned, because the more I think about it, the more it's like, okay, even if we solve their technology problem, I'm not sure it's going to be successful for them because the salespeople aren't involved enough to make sure that what's being built is actually solving the needs of their problems. So what do you think about that in terms of how involved do you think should sales be in the actual, features or scope or whatever you want to call it in terms of the projects?
It seems that to me it's like e-commerce 101. They should have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
But politics and organizations go all kinds of ways. So I don't know. At forward-thinking organizations, that should be a no-brainer. At a lot of these old guard companies, big or small, where there's issues with protection and everything else, who knows? But yeah, it's just a no-brainer that everybody from who's going to have a stake in the game should be at the table talking about what that stake should be, so everybody's on the same page with this stuff.
Yeah. So I know there's no silver bullet, but just to try and simplify and help people, let's say you're $100 million distributor and you're struggling with e-commerce, or maybe you don't have e-commerce, whatever it is. I think one of the first things that they should be doing, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is get someone with experience, let's call it the e-commerce manager. Is that where you think these companies should start? Someone that can kind of like be cross department and bring in sales, bring in the ERP folks, and kind of like work within. I think there has to be that champion and someone that's going to kind of like bring everything together to make it successful. And how would you envision that in the simplest way for these kind of mid-sized, smaller, B2B companies?
The simplest way is, I think, one step even before that, which is, okay, take your time and maybe it's the VP of marketing, maybe it's the CFO, maybe it's the janitor. I don't know. The thing is, someplace, in other words, select one go-to individual, even pre-e-commerce I'm talking about, but somebody who is interested, passionate, curious, loves new challenges, and what they start with is just old-fashioned homework. Call 3 platform vendors, tell them, we have no idea what this e-commerce thing is, but we think we want to kind of start down the path. So just start by talking to 3 platform vendors, and the vendors themselves are the guys who knows e-commerce better than the vendors who invent it and do it for a living. Get them to come in, and that's, they will tell you what e-commerce platforms do. They will tell you what theirs do because they're trying to sell you something. But the thing is, that is one aspect of homework that is pretty low-hanging fruit. Go do that because that's the first part of the education process. Now, number 2, put together a wish list of well, just even as just like ad hoc. What do you think this thing should do? We want it to do X. We want it to sell this. We want to do that. Well, then fine. Go out and make a list of, are your competitors doing it? If they are, then break down what they're doing in a simple Excel sheet, Google Doc. They have a shopping cart. They've got personalization. They promise that they'll deliver overnight. So go benchmark the competition, see what they're doing, and then that becomes, kind of a foundation for what you might want to do. And then go out and kick the tires on, well, I love Amazon. Great. Go and benchmark what they do and that, or more importantly, just go and spend some time kicking around Amazon Business, because they built a platform that has all the tools, all the bells, all the whistles that make up a pretty state-of-the-art platform. Just go and do a little homework on that. So, I tell companies quite a bit, what's your first step? Even before you hire an e-commerce champion, find somebody within the company who's motivated and go out and do some basic blocking and tackling and homework. So then you have some kind of idea of what it is you want to do that you can take to the business people and the IT people, and then you begin to kind of get down the road for finding that e-commerce manager out there, whoever that he or she might be. It could be from inside, who's going to be the person who's going to bind it all together and get you off the dime and down the road. So
I love it. Thank you.
I completely agree with that. And one of the other things too that comes up in conversations I have is really just you have to ask the question, like, do these companies talk with their customers enough, right? Because those customers are also going to feed you information on exactly what they see elsewhere, what they need, what they would like on their wish list for you to do. Mm-hmm. So even the most dedicated customer of your company, if you're kind of behind the times in tech, they're going to be happy to share that with you. And they'll say, well, gee, this is an issue for me. I can't do this on my mobile phone. Or, they'll just start telling you these things. And that's incredibly valuable too.
You hit a magnificent key point right there, which is just go out and do a quick survey. Mm-hmm. And then put together maybe a small user group of customers that will tell you flat out, good, bad, honest or otherwise, what it is they want. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That's probably even more important than the step I just mentioned, which is go talk to your customers first. What do they want? At the end of the day, it's all about them anyway,
Bingo. I mean, it just comes up every time. So I think, everything you said is critically important. And I think our listeners really going to be happy to hear that. And this other piece too is something that I just see a lot.
Yeah, no, these are so much we could probably do 10 more podcasts. I think we'll have
Let's
to bring
do
you
it.
back. We're gonna have to bring you back maybe like later in the year or after we see the real effects of COVID, and we can look back and see how the research came out. But one of the other things that we talked a little bit about, the failures with data and the sales culture. So what are the other big and you also talked about Amazon Business is now starting to mature a little bit. What do you think the biggest challenge, or what what do you think is going to stop these distributors, manufacturers? I like to look at the ones that are, let's say, sub few $100 million. I think once you're a $1 billion company, you usually have the resources to kind of hire some of the best people and kind of fix these things.
The last major stumbling block is basically, selling many to many, if you will. What I mean by that is, a lot of these companies, they're set up, their whole distribution system or how they sell to whatever market they sell into is geared around selling big quantities to a limited number of customers they've known how to do with for quite some time. Along comes e-commerce. It could be low volume to high volume demand. So they're not used to that. B2C is. A lot of these other companies in B2B are not. And because there is much more demand for this kind of service coming out of the COVID-19 stuff, a lot of companies are rushing to kind of figure out, how do I transition my distribution centers to delivering day two, overnight, 2 or 3 or 4 things versus a big pallet of things, if you will. So that is a huge stumbling block and learning curve that a lot of companies are being hit right between the eyes with right here, right now. But, they'll get it. They'll get it. They'll turn it around, or they won't, but they'll get it.
Yeah.
And then eventually through trial and error and just hard work and what works and what they have to kind of retool, they get it right and on they go.
Yeah.
It's e-commerce. It's e-commerce again. It's e-commerce again. The retail guys went through this and they lived to tell about it. So will the B2B guys.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because from somewhat we've had a few merchant, actual people, B2B operators on in the podcast, and it seems like there's kind of this trend where, especially with coronavirus, but I could see this just becoming the new trend, of the coming decade. And I'm curious to hear what trends you think are coming. But people don't necessarily want to worry about sitting on, a PO of 2,000, pieces of inventory. Like, actually, we just talked to a customer today that had a problem with Dick's Sporting Goods because obviously coronavirus. So, people they might want the bulk pricing of, okay, I want 2,000 units, but I don't want them all delivered, and I don't want to have to pay for them all at once. So I could see kind of this new functionality being developed around, like almost like a B2B subscription, where it's like, okay, I subscribe to 2,000 units a year, but I get, maybe 50 this month, 100 next month, and maybe I need 200 in summer. And like, you kind of, slowly spread out the inventory, and I only have to pay as I use the inventory. Do you see anything like that? Because we're seeing kind of like this new emerging kind of demand.
Well, the thing is, you're talking about the price complexity issue, which is another huge thing with these guys. You know what? My takeaway there is selling a book is one thing, but then selling something where it's by spec or by the kinds of provisions you just mentioned. All of that is custom pricing that has to be built into the platform in a way that allows it to do, that ties into bid management, that ties into contact negotiation, that ties into all kinds of buckets. And you know what? That is higher grade e-commerce technology that is certainly out there in droves, if you will, but a company has to be ready for it. They've got to spend for it because their customers want it, and they've got to put it in. But it's a very market-driven thing. So it might not be the same in MRO as it is in aerospace, if you will. But yeah, price complexity. And another big challenge too is open pricing versus behind the firewalls pricing. Well, we'll put our low end out there, or our manufacturer suggested retail price out there, and that's all we're going to do because, our alchemy is behind the firewall, where we give our best customers this kind of discount, and we'll never put that out in public. Well, guess what? Millennials are now the new purchasing managers, and guess what? They want more open transparency versus closed in. We'll have to kind of see how the whole shifts, how the whole filters out. Eventually, who's going to win? The procurement manager, because that's what they want. They're paying the bills, and the companies have to adjust what the customer demands. But for now, closed pricing versus open pricing, one more issue to kind of wrestle with,
Yeah, I love it.
I only had one other question, really, because I feel like we covered so many of the things I was thinking about asking you already. I really do. But it really is. I'm always fascinated with the B2B, B2C, play, and we've talked about that, extensively here. But is there something else you think that B2B should be thinking about that's really exclusively B2C at this point? But it should be something that like moves up on the agenda. It's like, well, wait a minute, I could apply that. I'm not quite sure what the answer would be. I'm just kind of curious what you think.
I think it comes down to this. I think another stumbling block, and here's another example, if you will. There aren't a lot of specialty recruiters in e-commerce, but there's a guy who I've known for many, many years. His name is Harry Joyner. Harry's a wonderful guy.
I've gotten 2 jobs through Harry. I know Harry.
Yeah. So very Harry, but for instance,
I know Harry very well.
But, Harry told me about, he does a lot of, he does a lot of B2B at the same time B2C. And for instance, what's unique to B2B? In the B2B world, you have to understand the customer demand and the touch points for not just one channel, but 4 to 5. That means if you think of a river going upstream with all kinds of tributaries that branch off in all kinds of different ways, you've got to figure that out. And that is, if you figure it out, that's the enchilada. You're there. But guess what? That is hard. That is fragmented. And that takes a unique skill set for a CMO in B2B to figure that out, because if you're going to drive whole digital commerce across all these buckets and all these audiences and so on and so forth, you've got to figure out at the end of the day, what does the customer want? And it's not just the site customer, it's the e-procurement, marketplace, EDI, e-procurement, private network individual. That's a whole bucket full of touch points, but you got to figure it out, because that's how people come to your site. And if you know them and serve them and bring them back with a good experience, then you've got a viable, successful, sustainable, long-term business. And these guys will figure it out. Retail did, B2B will too. So
Excellent. And I love Harry, by the way. We should talk to Harry about coming on the podcast at some point.
Well, guys, I've got to jump on another call here, but this has been very, very fun. Thank you so much for having me.
This is wonderful. It's so great having you here today.
Yeah, this has been really, really enlightening. So I just want to mention for listeners to come back for episode 9. We got David from 1024 from Slatwall. They actually have a kind of a lesser known, not one of the big name platforms. They do a lot of B2B e-commerce. They actually develop their own platform. So we're going to talk from one of our platform individuals on the next episode. But Mark, thanks so much. Yeah, this was amazing. My head's turning just from thinking about all this stuff.
No, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'd love to kind of do it again. In the meantime, I will get you those 2 names I promised. They'd be excellent guests for you as well. So,
great talking with you today.
Let's stay in touch.
Thanks, guys. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.